Time to fight fear with faith. Jody Paar is a survivor who is no longer staying silent. She and her guest will fuel you up so you too can fight fear. Uplifting and inspirational stories that will rock you to your core. We don't tiptoe around the truth. We steamroll it in a bold way. This is your life, and now is the time to start living it. Get ready for the Faith Over Fear podcast with Jody Paar. Now, welcome Jody Paar to inspire you.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Faith Over Fear. I'm so excited that you guys are back. Wow, at the guest I have today. She is absolutely amazing. Another powerful woman just spreading her truth, and it is a story that you guys definitely want to hear. So I have Sarah Gallardo. Is that correct?
You got it.
Good. Sarah Gallardo, and the name of her book is Hiding in Plain Sight. Wow. Like that is so powerful of a title. That just pulls you in. It pulls me in. So I'm going to hush right now and just turn it over to you. And Sarah, tell us what happened when the first time you felt fear with your ex-husband. And also, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, Jody, thank you so much for having me. Honestly, I was so excited to do your show and just talk with you, really. Yeah, just like, girl talk.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, I just to give a little bit of the backstory of how I met my ex-husband, I was in another relationship at the time, and a mutual friend of my ex-husband's and mine noticed that I was having issues, and she was like, okay, girl, like that is clearly not working out, but there's this other guy I just wanted you to meet. Looking back, she and I are no longer friends. Mm-hmm. But at the time, I trusted her advice. So being that I was in a relationship, I sort of proceeded very cautiously. And I met this man who was my, now ex-husband. In my book, I call him Scott. Mm-hmm. So for purposes of this conversation, I'll continue to call him Scott. I didn't use his real name just for legal purposes. Right. But, I went through so much in my childhood that I came out with a really rickety foundation. I was confused as a child, as a preteen, a teenager, going into my first year of college. And so relationships for me were not working out well at the time. I was attracted to the wrong people because I was raised around the wrong people. And that felt comfortable to me. So I went, the person that I was dating at the time, and I met the man who I ended up marrying and then divorcing, my abuser. He was super charming at first, of course, and now as exactly. Well, and that's the thing is that, we're all like, been there, done that, because that's what they do. And as a subject matter expert on the topic of domestic violence, I now know that the term for that is called love bombing.
Yes, it is.
Right. And so love bombing in the beginning of a relationship is when someone says all the right things, does all the right things, make you feel like you're the center of their universe. And that's exactly what happened. And of course I fell for it hook, line, and sinker, because I was like, he understands me. He sees me. I'm finally feeling appreciated and loved. It's not love. It's all a ruse. It's smoke and mirrors. But when you're in it and you're a vulnerable young person trying to navigate your way through some pretty difficult, adult type relationships, you're kind of a sitting duck if you don't know what to look for, what the red flags are, and if you don't know yourself well enough to create firm boundaries and know what you're worth to begin with, which is exactly where I was. So the first time I felt fear with my ex-husband was so with my ex-husband, I experienced what is called reproductive abuse. And so I wasn't allowed to take birth control. And I knew that I didn't want to have a child with, so early on in a relationship, but also once the relationship progressed and I realized he was abusive, I didn't want to have a child with an abusive person. So I would hide birth control pills, like in my makeup case or somewhere, but every place that I put them, he would end up finding them. He would flush them.
Were you married at this time?
Nope, I wasn't.
Tell me when the first time was where you were like, okay, the love bombing has kind of slowed down a little bit. And then you see a glimpse of what I call the monster. Like, when did that happen?
So that was, I had hidden my birth control pills. This was the first time he found them.
Okay.
There was the first altercation, and that came out of nowhere for me because I had gone through all the love bombing and I was prepped for a lifetime of being appreciated and loved, which was not at all in the future for me with that relationship. So he was he smoked pot and I didn't want him to. So I took a bag of it and I put it in my mouth. I wasn't going to swallow it. I just put it in my mouth because I didn't know what to do. I was trying to keep it away. And in response to that, he kicked off the driver's side mirror of my car. He kicked it clean off my car. And that was the first time that he had destroyed some of my property, which is usually the way that abuse begins in these kinds of relationships. He ended up trashing that car entirely, piece by piece. And again, broke so many cell phones, broke my glasses, all these things. They're huge red flags, but to me, having been so vulnerable and feeling like, oh my gosh, he loves me, I was like, well, he didn't mean it. He has anger issues. He went through childhood problems himself. I can help him through this. So, those are, again, the typical, this is the narcissist and the empath bond and relationship, which really fits so well. Unfortunately, the dynamic is just a perfect match of like this downward spiral,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. And for our listeners listening and watching, it always starts that way. They don't come out being a monster. They come out being Prince Charming. They come out buying you stuff. They come out to know every single little detail about you, which a lot of times is because they're going to hold that against you later. And there's always the main thing, control. And when that control starts, control from finances, controlling what you eat, controlling who you see, controlling even the bedroom situation, controlling everything.
Yep.
So that's something I know that you also dealt with. So the first time that he was mean to you and you felt that fear, everybody wants to know, well, did you ever think about leaving and getting away? Or did you ever think of, or when I hear a story like that, my first thought is, because I know this is how I felt like damaged goods, and this is the best I can get.
That really, really resonates with me. I have felt like damaged goods for a very long time. And once you feel that way, it's so hard to step out of that. And you almost have to not even re-enlighten yourself, because it's almost as if you never realized your self-worth, but you have to almost introduce you to you and be like, hey girl, I freaking love you. Like, you're so amazing. You know what I mean? But like, almost make friends with yourself, because the way you and I can talk, I can see you as this separate, beautiful human being. But when I look in the mirror, I'm like, oh, you can't continue forward that way, because really what you're doing is you're picking up the slack where your abuser left off. You know, you remove them from your own life, but then you yourself in your own mind, in your own interactions with yourself, become abusive in your heart and soul, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And it always starts out mentally. Mentally, people, and then they're like, oh, well, they're just having a bad day, or they just, but it always starts out. I mean, we could talk about this for hours upon hours upon hours, because I was in this kind of relationship for 4 years. So I definitely know the signs to look for. And so when they start being ugly to you, or calling you fat, or calling you stupid, or calling you names, don't just brush that off. You know, that is the first signs, because what's coming next is going to hurt you physically. And the mentally is a lot of times worse to me than the physical, because the physical, it's painful, but it goes away. The mental sticks and imprisons in your brain and your mindset, and that's what you have to break free from. So did you notice that, like, in the beginning, where he started to be mentally abusive, and then it led into seeing his full on anger? And then when did it lead to actually contact to you?
So for me, and this is actually a statistic, and I didn't know that until after I left and I started, learning more about abuse and narcissism. Two of the most dangerous times for particularly a woman when leaving an abuser is when she's pregnant and when she's leaving. I thought, again, here's this man trying to basically force me to have a child, because in his mind, he that's a link, that's a chain link that cannot be broken. And so I was like, the first time I actually did become pregnant by him, that's when he became physically violent. And he was so physically violent that he caused me to have a miscarriage.
Wow.
Not once, but twice.
Wow.
I was pregnant 3 times by him, and I have 1 child.
Wow.
In order to save my daughter, who will be 13 in August. Oh, 13. I am not looking forward to this. In order to save that pregnancy, my daughter, by that time, I learned what was happening. I knew the deal. I'm pregnant, he's going to hit me. What I ended up doing was I would sort of stay back and always be near a corner in any room, whatever room it was, because I would think to myself, where can I wedge my stomach in order to protect it? And it was, that did end up happening, where I had to put my pregnant belly in the corner of the room and brace myself pat down style. And he hit me all from behind, but wasn't able to affect my belly, my baby.
Yes, you protected her.
Yep. And actually, she returned the favor. Not, that any baby really realizes they have that power, but after I gave birth to that baby girl and I held her in my arms, especially having been a little girl who wasn't protected by her parents, who, her parents, there was neglect, there was abuse, there was all kinds of things in my childhood. As a girl who had grown up, trying to raise her 2 younger sisters and protect them from the bad things that were happening to me, I had that protection ingrained in me already. I held that baby girl and I was like, there's no way I'm going to sit quietly and watch somebody hurt her. Number 1. Number 2, there's no way I'm going to allow her to grow up learning that being hurt by your partner is acceptable. Because if that happens, it's going to be my fault.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I knew it. And I'm not saying this to blame other people. So if other people out there had their children with their abuser and weren't able to leave, this is not a judgment of those people at all.
Right.
Everybody's story is different. Everybody's circumstances are different. And so you get out when you can. and there is no shame involved in how you choose or are able to do that.
Right. Absolutely. So were you still with him when you had her, or had you already left?
I was still with him. I left with her when she was 6 months old.
Okay.
And I'll never forget, there was one time, you know, if people can think back to having had their children and, you know, what their partner did as a parent, you know, co-parenting, I was not comfortable leaving her with him. But I was becoming isolated because of her too. So in a way, my attempts at keeping her safe were beginning to shrink my world even more than it already had because of him. And so my aunt asked me to go to a basketball game with her. This is something we had done, you know, all the time over the years. And at first I said no. I was like, I can't leave the baby. And she's like, let him watch her just once, kind of a thing. I went to the game. I found out that we lived in an apartment building where it was like 6 apartments, and they were split, so 2 on each floor. And the girl who lived on the floor next to us ended up telling me that when I left, he left her alone in the apartment to go hang out a couple floors down, because he thought, well, she's just a baby, she can't go anywhere or do anything, and he just left her in her crib alone. And ever since I found that out, I was like, nope, never, never, never again. Never again.
Right. So how did you finally leave?
I actually, and I don't talk about this very often, I did one interview where I told this story. I don't even tell this story in my book.
I understand that. I can definitely relate to you.
But the truth is that he was on parole, probation, I don't know, one of those. And I think I think probation, because it's before you go into prison. Anyway, and he would take me along with him when he would go see his PO, because I made him look
right
so good. I would go in and play the part. I was there as a prop, really. I was there with the same smoke and mirrors that he put me through in the beginning of our relationship. He was doing that to her. And so she thought, you know, oh, they're so cute. He has this lovely wife who's there and taking care of everyone. And she really kind of laid back on him. My aunt, the one who I mentioned, she ended up calling, finding out who the parole officer was, or probation, sorry, whatever. And let her know what was actually happening. And my aunt called me one day. Now here, I wasn't allowed to have social media at the time. We had a house phone, which now sometimes people don't even have anymore. Everybody has a cell phone. But we did have a house phone, and my aunt called me on it. And I picked up the phone, and I was like, hello, like normal. But again, he was next to me, because that is also a very normal thing. Always next to me. What am I saying? What are they saying? Basically, he was a third party in every phone conversation.
Yeah.
Whether the other person on the other side of the phone knew it or not. And so, she was like, I picked up the phone. I was like, hello. She goes, Sarah, it's Nancy. Now act like something happened. And I'm like, and I just go, because I had like a second
right
to figure out what to say or do. So I just gasped.
Right.
And she was like, on the other line, she said, okay, now listen. She said, say something about grandma being in the hospital. And I was like, oh no, grandma's in the hospital? And I don't know what's happening. I'm literally now just going with whatever she says, because nobody prepped me for this at all.
Right.
She said to me, now listen, get the baby, get the dogs. I had at the time 2 small dogs and a cat. She said, we'll come back for fur ball, get the dogs and the baby. She said, take whatever you need for them and get here. Just get to this house. And I was like, and so here I am on the other line, and now he's kind of like following along, but I'm trying to create enough distance that he can't hear her voice on the other side of the phone. And so I'm like, oh no, okay, don't worry, I'll be right there. No, it's okay, everything's fine, I'll bring the baby, just, you know, da-da-da-da. And in a way, my actual panic helped make that seem very real, I think, because I hung up the phone and I just said, you know, my grandma's in the hospital. I have to go now. Like, you know, this isn't the kind of thing that you need to be there for. In fact, like, this really isn't the time. And he knew my family, like, hated him. So at that point, and that was no, you know, secret. Right. So I did. I got the baby. I got my breast pump. I got my dogs. I got their dog food. You know, I brought nothing for myself.
Yeah.
Nothing. And you and I both know that, as, you know, particularly women who have experienced abuse over such a long period of time, we don't think about ourselves in these scenarios. And so I ended up at the house with my aunt and my grandma, who was not, in fact, in the hospital. And once I got to the house, my aunt explained to me, she said, I made a deal with the probation officer that as long as you and the baby are safe, that nothing will, like, she won't call DCF, nothing will happen to you, but you have to tell her where to find whatever she's looking for in the house. And she said she needs to find things, because if she doesn't, then the worst of, like, the most protection we can give you won't happen. So you need to cooperate, was basically, in that moment, in that small space and time, it was basically explained to me that I have a choice between my husband or my child. And for me, that was an easy decision.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I understand. I always, when I do these interviews, I always just speak from my heart. And I know that's where you just spoke from. I could feel that. And like you, a lot of times I'm like, I don't normally tell this part, but I just feel led to. So I really, really believe, Sarah, with all my heart, that somebody needed to hear that part of your story, and that somebody is going to definitely resonate with that. And it's gonna let somebody know they're not alone. And they're not.
Well, you know what, Jody? I think you're absolutely right. I 100% am on the same page with you in terms of having faith in what the kinds of things that you and I do for other people in the world, how our messages resonate, who they touch, and how, and for whoever needed to hear this, or you know, I'm getting goosebumps.
I know, me too.
Whoever needs to hear this. There it is, girl. That's how we know. I want people to know that please don't be upset with your family members who are trying to help. Mm-hmm. This is really important. I mean, I ended up staying with my aunt and my grandma. There were 4 generations of us females under one roof. And I'll tell you what, it wasn't easy. Right. But they sacrificed in order for me to have a place to stay that was safe, you know, from violence, that was safe from threats of anything that my ex-husband brought into the picture. So scared, angry with her. And I ended up I had to repeat to her, I don't blame you. I know what you did was out of love and protection. And quite frankly, you know, that took courage on her part, because it's a tough love kind of situation. Yeah. She did what would keep me and my daughter safe at the cost of my relationship with her. She was willing for me to hate her forever, just to make sure that we were safe. And it required me to think with my open mind and open heart, and really, really look at the real situation, and admit that I was in danger and my baby was in danger. And although that was a really tough situation, she ended up doing the very right thing. You know, so for those people in our lives who are reaching out and trying to help, I know that you get angry sometimes, you get annoyed, you think that they're putting your relationship at risk, or, you know, this is because you've been manipulated and basically brainwashed by your abuser to think that these people are your enemies, when really they're there trying to help you, but you're so deep in it that you can't see the forest through the trees.
Right. Yeah, that's so good. And, you know, it comes to a point, like I remember my family, he would try his best to keep me from my family. He would do everything. And that was a guilt that I really carried, especially when my dad passed away, because there was so many times where I would normally go visit them or be with them, and he would always keep me from that. And so I'm glad that you touched on that, because a lot of times your abuser will make you think your family is the one against you, and that is not the case. They love you and they're trying to protect you, and you know, they know how bad of a situation that you're in. So yeah, thank you for touching on that. Another thing that I know with myself, when I finally got away, which I left like 22 times and went back 22 times. So I can relate with that person that kept going back. Don't beat yourself up about that. It's literally like a game to them. And when they want to start love bombing again, they know when to, and they know when to, you know, continue doing that to get you back again. And it's like, I always used to think, oh, the good is just so good. But it was like the bad was 1,000 times worse, but it would always be the good that I was drawn back to in them. Tell me about your nonprofit. Tell me what your nonprofit is, what your nonprofit's about. Tell me about your nonprofit.
Yeah, so it's called Sarah Speaks Up.
Love
and
it.
Thank you. I really started that because having gone through my abusive marriage, I really needed help when I left. Like I said, I was in shock. And so my mom and my aunt found this organization that's local here, a domestic violence organization. And I started to go to weekly domestic violence survivor support group. Now, I think that people don't like the idea of support groups. I think that there are some people who are like, support group, no, automatically. But to me, I really want people to know that, specifically having come out of abuse and domestic violence, I needed to be in a room full of people who got it.
Yeah.
Who went through it too, and who I didn't have to explain, like, you know, okay, I'm not crazy, but this happened. We all knew that all of us weren't crazy. We all knew what we went through. It was a room full of people who understood without judgment, who could share ideas, who could share resources, you know, like how daycare, or, you know, if somebody needed help with food, or, you know, money assistance or housing or any of those things. Everybody knew something, and we all kind of we fed. I was going to say feed in. Yeah. Sorry.
It's okay.
We all fed each other. And you know, it turned into this kind of family type situation. So they had age restrictions. And so my infant daughter couldn't go into the childcare at the time. And so my mom used to pick me. She would drive a half an hour to pick both of us up. She would take me for pizza. I would make sure the baby had her, you know, I would feed the baby before I went into my session. My mother would take my daughter to the park, would keep her in the car. She would go somewhere for an hour and a half and then come back and pick me up to make sure that I could go to my weekly group, you know? And that's a really great example. If people are wondering, how do I support someone who's been abused or who is being abused? You know, going the extra mile is huge. Making that phone call for them is huge. Literally she walked me to the thing. She dropped me off at the door and she fed me on the way. Like, this is the kind of stuff that people who go through these things just need. So after I went through that group situation, after 4 years, I still went, and the facilitator said to me, okay, look, honey, you're coming here now. You're helping more people than you're getting help now. She's like, you've gotten to the point where you're running this thing. She said, I really encourage you to go and get your domestic violence counseling certification. She's like, it's a free course. The state gives it. You know, she told me all the stuff. And for a while, it was like, when someone suggested I should get a job, I was like, oh, you know, can't do that. I'm not qualified. But eventually, after she continued to not push, but coax, I went. And after I went, I then became the facilitator of the group that I was part of for all that time, because I didn't know, but she was moving. She was actually kind of grooming me to take over. The organization found out that I write poetry, and I wrote this poem called The Choice, which, if you want, I do know it by heart, so I can do it today if you like.
Go ahead, girl. Go ahead. I want to hear it.
Yeah. Okay. So, okay, I will do The Choice if you want, but I started writing poetry. I started going to like Rotary clubs, and they would use me as a speaker to give like survivor feedback or tell my survivor story. And every time I did that, it was a bigger venue. There were more people. And afterwards, more people came up to me and they said, I needed to hear that. That resonated with me. That happened to me. I never told my husband. I'm going to go home and tell him today. And all of this good started being this ripple effect, you know, and I ended up, I stayed on as I was one of the founding members of the fundraising committee at that organization, but I also merged and I started my own, you know, Sarah Speaks Up, and that all started with just trying to find a professional email address, you know. Now I've created a program called the Veterans for Victims program, which it's when we pair military veterans with domestic violence victims, and they escort them to and from court so that they feel safe and supported while they testify against their abuser.
That's awesome. That's so
Thank you.
Awesome. Yes.
Thank you. There's that, and then there's also the Fresh Start program, which is we take household donations from community members, and we help furnish the new apartments of women and children who come out of emergency housing. And once they come out of shelter and they get their first place, they basically start with nothing. We take community donations and we help them. I actually have a YouTube clip about that. So if you want, I'll send that to you, Jody.
Yeah, I would love to link that below with everything else. Girl, you're amazing. Thank you so much for being on here today. Thank you for sharing your story, your strength, all of it. I love what all you're doing now. You're no longer a victim. You're a victor now, girl. You keep going after your dreams. Yes. For our listeners and people watching, tell them how they can find you.
So I am available you can reach me via email. It's sarahspeaksup@gmail.com. Sarah is spelled with an H. I also have the website, which is just sarahspeaksup.org. I have, I think, 56,000 followers on Facebook. So if you want, follow on Facebook. That's a really great forum. People can send questions. People can message me there. You know, a lot of times I'll throw up memes or do a live and people will comment, and then others come in to support each other. So that's great. You know, I'm also on Instagram, and now I am a member of an organization called Speak Up and Empower, which is based out of Canada. So if you're interested, go to speakupandempower.com, and I am an expert on their panel as well. And if you are interested in buying my book, It's Hiding in Plain Sight, and that's available on Amazon. And there's also a link on my website.
Awesome. Sarah, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you girls so much. Guys, thanks for listening and watching. My name is Jody Paar. You can find me, JodyPaar, on all social media platforms. Thank you again for being here, and keep changing the world, girl. It's awesome.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.